My name is Adele, and welcome to Youth Perspective.
So I'm Lizzy and I play the piano. I study piano and composition at the junior RNCM and the causes I support. All the good ones, hopefully.
So how long have you been playing the piano?
Okay, so I started having lessons when I was 4, so that makes it 15 years now.
Wow.
So a really, really long time.
And do you play any other instruments, or has it just been the piano?
Not as well as piano. I mean, I've picked up bits and pieces of other things.
Okay.
It's just
So what is it particularly about the piano and jazz? Because you're a jazz musician. What is it about that particularly attracted you?
So I actually only started playing jazz maybe 3-4 years ago, and I've only really started having proper lessons this year. So yeah, the majority of my piano playing life has been classical, and I think what I really liked about jazz was just how fun it is. It's just a lot of fun, and you know, the environment when you're playing with other jazz players is just a really kind of invigorating thing. Compared to classical, I mean, I really love classical as well, but performing under that kind of pressure is a lot different to performing in a jazz context, and I like the idea that if something goes wrong, it's kind of like fine.
I totally agree. So, like, what's your aim as a musician? You said you were studying. What's next after that? Where do you hope to go in, I don't know, a year's time?
So I'm actually going on to do a languages degree, so I'm not studying music at higher education, but I'm really hoping to kind of keep going with it. I'm doing a lot of sort of outreach work with MIO at the moment, and trying to kind of develop some ways of reaching out to people digitally while we're kind of dealing with this pandemic. So I really like the kind of outreach side of things. I hope that if I do any more music, that it's very much based on like getting more people involved, especially young people and teenagers, and just making the music world more accessible in general.
Awesome. You mentioned that you've been working with NYO. What's that been like for you as a musician?
It's been really cool. I first started working with MIO 3 years ago. I started doing like some Inspire workshops and stuff with them. Everybody at MIO kind of does Inspire work anyway as part of your role at MIO, but I kind of noticed that they didn't have a lot of composery workshops, and so I kind of worked with them to start designing workshops that were a bit more based on like creating music and writing music as well as being able to play it. So that's kind of where my journey with MYO started, and they've kind of they've kind of had me on board ever since. At the moment, we're working on like kind of designing a webinar where we look at ways of comparing musical skills in person to the musical skills that we need to play remotely together, and so that's what we're working on at the moment. It's been really cool. It's a really rewarding thing to do.
It's great. It's great. You mentioned also something about starting a podcast. What would that be about? Is it music related or general or?
So I'm looking to go into journalism, and I guess I'm just kind of looking for a way to kind of broadcast my conversations with people, which is what a podcast is. It's called The Other Box, and it's all about this idea that we can't really put our identities into little boxes. And there's always kind of this little grey area that nobody likes to define, whether that's about gender or whether that's about sexuality or political orientation or anything like that, that doesn't feel like you kind of belong on either side. I like to talk to people who find themselves in that place, and so my podcast is just a bunch of episodes where I kind of have conversations with people, and then I like to kind of write about it and explore that a little bit. So
Wow, that's a really, really interesting concept. Not one I've heard before. Be that podcast for sure. Speaking of grey areas, I noticed that you support many causes. Like, what's the motivation behind that?
I guess it always seems like a really weird, like, I'm such a good person thing to talk about. I just like to talk about the things that I care about, to be honest. And there's very evidently a lot of things that are wrong with the world. And sometimes it feels like there's not a lot that we can do about it. But I think standing up and talking about it constantly and just shouting about it all the time is the only thing that we can do, really, and it does make a difference, even if those differences are really minute. And I think that's part of why I kind of am really attracted to journalism and kind of getting into that field, because I just like to talk about the things that are going on, and sort of being in the middle of all of that seems the best way to do it.
Awesome. I'm actually curious, would you consider yourself an activist?
That's a really good question. Especially since the Black Lives Matter movement has kind of reignited in sort of the recent year or whatever, I've been kind of doing a lot of thinking about that and whether I'm doing enough to be able to call myself an activist or not. I like to think of myself as one, I guess. I think that, I really like hearing about people's, especially sort of marginalized people's lives and experiences, and that's partially what my podcast is for, to kind of giving those people a platform. My first 3 episodes have featured people from ethnic minority backgrounds, and so I like to think that I am, but I think there's always more that we can be doing. I wish I went to more protests. I wish that I signed more petitions and things like that. But I think there's more to being an activist than just that stuff. And I think it's just about what you try to do in your everyday life. And in my everyday life, I try to be the best person that I can. And if that means that I'm an activist, then I guess, yeah, I am. And if it doesn't, then, so...
I heard you said the first 3 episodes. Does that mean your podcast has already started?
Yeah, so I've got a website, and I kind of want to feature some of my writing portfolio on there and everything as well. So, but yeah, 3 of my episodes have been recorded, and hopefully the first one, like I said, will air next week.
Hello and welcome to The Other Box, the show where I, Lizzy Gür, talk to people who have interesting things to say and try and understand them a little better. In this episode, I chat to my friend Steph, who is an architecture and engineering student at the University of Sheffield. She's also a musician and a very, very talented artist, so I'll link some of her stuff in the description for you to go and have a look at, which you absolutely should do. I believe she has some music coming out really, really soon as well, so stay posted for that. Steph also happens to be a Spanish immigrant with Venezuelan heritage, and she has some really fascinating things to say about that in today's episode. So thank you for listening, and I hope very much that you enjoy the show.
All right. How are you dealing with the lockdown as a musician and the pandemic in general?
Yeah, it's been tough, obviously. I haven't played with my band in 9 months or whatever, 10 months, however long it's been. And I've not been doing a lot of rehearsing with people other than at RNCM. We did for a bit over the pandemic, but now that we're in a national lockdown, we're not even doing that. So it is hard because it's a very, very big part of my life, and it becomes quite difficult to motivate yourself to practice when you don't have any performances to work towards or anything like that, any gigs. But I think we're very lucky that there's so many ways to still stay in touch with each other nowadays, and we're kind of, I've looked into ways of doing remote recordings with my friends and stuff, and that kind of thing is fun in itself. But it is difficult. It's been a very difficult part of the pandemic for me, because I think, like I said, I really enjoy classical and I like performing on my own, but it's nothing like playing with my, jazz musicians at all. And that kind of thing you can only really do in person, and you can't just do it by yourself in your study. So I do miss it a lot.
Great. One last question. What advice would you give to upcoming jazz musicians, especially during this time?
Okay, so I have something really specific and something a little more generic. One thing is, make sure you have good gear. Get recording gear. It is so worth the investment, because there's going to be so much remote recording and videoing that people are going to want to do with you, and it's just a really nice way of kind of staying in touch with people. And I've tried to do that throughout this pandemic, and I haven't really been able to, because I don't have good gear. I have really rubbish gear. And so I would really recommend that, it can't do you any harm, even once we're out of the pandemic, having a good mic and good stands and a good interface or whatever to record with is really worth having. So I would say do that. And second of all, don't put too much pressure on yourself to practice harder than you've ever practiced before, because I know a lot of people are doing that at the moment because of all the extra time and everything. But to be honest, it's a difficult time to motivate yourself to do anything, and I think that that's okay. I've found that kind of just practicing when I feel like it and just making sure that I'm enjoying it and not putting loads of stress on myself has helped me kind of keep going with it. I think if I was trying to use this time to get ahead or whatever, I would be really miserable. And so maybe that's just me, but if you're the kind of person who can do that, then that's great and cool, good for you. But I think a lot of people are doing that to their detriment at the moment, and I would advise against it.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for coming. All of Lizzy's link down below. Yes, thank you so much to Lizzy for coming.
Thank you. Thanks.